the property management industry, fair housing offenses are considered especially troubling. In the United States, a dedicated fair housing attorney, Leslie Tucker, provides case explanations and best practices. These are some cases.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fair Housing Insiders Case Files, episode 34, with Leslie Tucker, the principal of Williams, Edelstein, and Tucker. I'm your host, Jonathan Saar. Welcome back to our channel. We're grateful to have you here. Today, we are delving into an important case that highlights some important fair housing issues. United States versus Evolve Bank and Trust. Now, this case involves lending practices and their impact on fair housing opportunities. Joining me to unpack this case and the fair housing implications is Leslie, our resident fair housing expert. So, Leslie, nice to have you with us. Could you start by giving us an overview of the case?
Sure, Jonathan. This case involves allegations by the Department of Justice against Evolve Bank and Trust. Like you said, they are based in Memphis. Good. The government alleged that from, at least 2014 through 2019, this bank engaged in practices that resulted in Black, Hispanic, and female borrowers paying more in discretionary pricing components like interest rates for home loans than white and male borrowers.
Interesting. So this case doesn't appear to be about rental housing. So how do these alleged practices relate to the Fair Housing Act?
Well, the Fair Housing Act is very broad. It prohibits discrimination in all housing-related transactions, including mortgage lending, which is what this case is about, on the basis of the 7 protected categories federally: race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, and disability. In this case, the alleged discriminatory lending practices hindered equal access to housing finance for certain protected categories. So that would be a violation of the act if it was proven.
Got it. Okay, so can you explain how the bank's practices affected borrowers?
Yeah, so the bank's loan officers, and that's really what this case focused on. The loan officers had very broad discretion to set the initial interest rates for borrowers and, adjust fees really without any oversight, without any justification needed, which the government notes as being very unusual within this industry. The loan officers had similar discretion to offer concessions and discounts to any borrowers or no borrowers for reasons completely unrelated to creditworthiness or loan characteristics. So this kind of discretionary practice among the loan officers presents a fair lending risk because when there are significant disparities in mortgage rates between different borrowers with similar credit profiles, there's no discernible justification for that difference. So,
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so what were the key findings that supported the allegations of discrimination?
So after a investigation by the Department of Justice, they did find statistically significant disparities between different borrowers. So, for example, in 2017, which was kind of right in the middle of their investigation period, Black borrowers paid on average about $360 more per person in discretionary pricing, interest rates, than white borrowers for similar loans.
Yeah.
Move on to Hispanic borrowers who were paying about $420 more per person than white borrowers. And then moving on to female borrowers, paying about $280 more than their male counterparts. And these differences couldn't be explained by legitimate factors such as creditworthiness or loan characteristics.
Intriguing. So from a fair housing law standpoint, why is this significant?
So these types of disparities, when they're identified, can indicate a pattern or a practice of discrimination, which is obviously prohibited by the Fair Housing Act. The Act not only forbids overt discrimination, but also practices that have this type of discriminatory effect, even if there's really not an intent to discriminate. The bank's practices here seemingly allowed for unchecked discretion that the Department of Justice alleged, resulted in these types of adverse effects for certain protected classes.
Okay. So how did the settlement address these fair housing concerns?
So yeah, this case did resolve in through a settlement, and there were multiple measures taken within that settlement. Of course, the bank agreed to create a very large compensation fund for whatever borrowers were negatively impacted by these practices. They have to revise their policies to limit discretionary pricing, and making sure that their pricing decisions are based on objective, non-discriminatory criteria and not just, whatever reason a loan officer comes up with in their head. And they also had to, they have to maintain a committee that sort of monitors their fair lending practices and making sure everything is overseen by that committee. So there was a pretty broad, thorough settlement agreement to resolve this case.
Right. And this, as cases do, right, they set a precedent for everyone in future situations. So what message does this send to other lenders regarding fair housing compliance?
Well, I think in general, of course, it sort of reminds people that the Fair Housing Act isn't just for the rental community, right? This absolutely applies. This subject matter applies under the Fair Housing Act. Mm-hmm. Lenders have to be proactive in identifying any policies or practices that they have that could present a fair lending risk. Most companies do have these means to identify these problematic practices. And if you find one, or if you find that something may present a risk, those policies should be modified right away to reduce, the lender's risk of liability. And of course, obviously to ensure that their borrowers have an equal access to their credit, their housing opportunities, regardless of their protected categories.
Yeah. Thank you, Leslie. Appreciate you shedding light on the fair housing aspects of this case. And it's so vital for both consumers and industry professionals to understand these issues and make sure everyone has fair housing. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks.
And to our amazing community, thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing this content. If you found it informative, please share it with your team. Like the video, subscribe to our channel. Very grateful for your support. It's your support that helps us keep going and keeping this show. And we're always appreciative of all the feedback that you give us. So until next time, stay informed and committed to equality. Take care, everyone.